spending their money on Frederic Malle, Gucci, Prada, Fendi. It was ridiculous. Good morning or good evening, wherever you guys are. I'm Zoe. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be discussing my most embarrassing, most regrettable financial mistakes. If you're new to this channel, make sure you slap that like button and hit the subscribe button and the bell so you don't miss any more financial wealth chat videos on this channel. Put your hands up if you overspent when you were in college. My first financial regret took place when I was studying design at university. I don't know about you, but when you're in a creative subject or a creative major like design, fashion design, graphic design, for some reason there tends to be quite a few very wealthy international students, and the culture on my course was that people were always flexing, always buying designer clothes, always going to the most trendy, hipster, but often very overpriced restaurants, resulting in what I call flexing syndrome. So what is flexing syndrome? Flexing syndrome is what I call lifestyle inflation. Lifestyle inflation is basically when people spend on non-essential items, luxury items, before they even cover their essential costs, their bills, or even put away money into savings. And the thing is, it's something you really can't afford to do when you're in college. Unless you're like, a rich international student or something. But it was actually students from very regular backgrounds on very regular part-time salaries, because we were, studying full-time, who were going out and spending their money on Frederic Malle, Gucci, Prada, Fendi. It was ridiculous. People were coming in Dries Van Noten coats into class. People were flexing Gucci. I think my biggest regret is actually starting to get sucked into it and often finding myself at really expensive restaurants where I had no business being there on a part-time retail salary, as I actually worked through university in retail to supplement my university fees and everyday expenses. My biggest regret is definitely spending more money than I could afford to spend. And I even remember a situation where I went to like a fashion PR party, which happened to be actually hosted by A$AP Rocky at the Mondrian Hotel at Sea Containers. I had no business being there, but I remember looking down at the menu in this hotel, and I swear to God, there was like a shot of rum that cost maybe £80 or £50 or something extortionate. And I often found myself like just going along with it and going to these restaurants. I even remember one time I went to a friend's leaving or birthday party, and it was at this really expensive high-end steakhouse called Gaucho, and I remember looking down at the bill like, I remember just looking down at the bill and then thinking, why have I done this to myself? And that leads to my second financial regret, which is going into overdraft way too often during my time at university. Going into overdraft is really bad for your credit score. It's nowhere near as bad as, say, missing your bill payments or missing standing order payments each month, but it does still affect your credit score in the long term if it's something you keep doing. I know people at university who went thousands into their overdraft, and it's just so damaging. It's so damaging if you want to get a house later on in life, if you want to get a car loan. It's really such a bad habit to get into. So I actually remember limiting my overdraft to £500, which is still, not a good idea to use or to go into it, but I even knew at that age that I can't trust myself, or I don't even want to run the risk of going thousands into overdraft. And actually towards the end of my degree, I just got rid of my overdraft, or most of it altogether, so I don't allow myself to go into it, because I'm very serious about, or I became very serious about building up my credit score and preparing myself for longer term asset investments. Don't go into overdraft, guys. I know, I can see you students, and that's the thing. When you go to Freshers Week, which is our introduction into university in first year, Credit card companies and banks actually advertise to students during Freshers Week, and that's how they catch people out. There's so many banks advertising student accounts and student overdraft packages and luring people into starting to build up debt early on in their life, and it's something I really don't agree with. Remember, smart, wealthy people dress like they're poor while saving into investments and become wealthier, but then poor people spend all their money to look richer and end up damaging themselves financially in the long term. Don't fall for the trap. Don't fall for the Fashion Week trap. If you happen to be studying fashion and you see everyone walking around in, designer clothes, looking all stylish, it's fine. Let them spend their money. The thing is, I love fashion and I still did dress very stylishly during my time in design school. But the thing is, I found other ways to do it very cheaply. A way I got around it was through my design internships. I would often receive clothes for free. I feel like being in that industry throughout my 20s, I was just receiving free clothes all the time. I'm not somebody who spends a lot on clothes, even though it might seem like I do. If anyone saw me in designer clothes, it was often given to me for free or at a very, very, very minuscule cost, like £2, or from a sample sale. You'll see people in the creative fields looking very stylish, wearing very expensive clothes, but they're often not even spending their money on those clothes in the first place. So please don't keep up with the Joneses. Don't feel the need to be hipster or be super trendy. So many of those fashion students and design students were brokady, nil, in the minus. Don't be one of them. Trust me, it's not worth it. I would say one of my next financial mistakes is maybe not taking enough time to consider the new student loan increases, which took place when I started university. I remember I was the first year in the UK of students to pay the new £9,000 a year student fees each year for tuition. And the thing is, it happened so quickly. I remember maybe a year before enrolling or a year before starting, they just suddenly increased it. They tripled the fees, and I had no time to really put away any additional money towards it. As far as I knew up until then, I thought it was going to be £3,000 a year, and that was that. So that's what I mentally prepared for. That's what I financially prepared for. When it went to £9,000 plus a year, I was like, she wasn't ready. I was not ready at all.
She wasn't ready. She wasn't ready.
All I knew was I wanted to start university as soon as possible, so I just dove straight in. I took the student loan, but in hindsight, was that student loan worth £9,000 plus a year? I don't think so. I think that's a financial mistake. I do think that it's important to invest in yourself, into your education, and into a particular career path, especially if you know what industries you want to go into. But I do think you need to be careful about how much student loan you take on as a student, as somebody who possibly might not be able to pay it back very quickly. Looking at how much interest these student loans are going to accumulate over time, because they really build up extremely quickly. Every time I looked at my student loan, I swear it was like someone just punched me in the stomach each time. It was bad. It was shocking, very shocking. I mean, I've never seen figures attached to my name of that size before. Brokady, okay? It's not wise to start your career life in major debt. I know it's something they normalize as part of the education system, but I really think that it's just unreasonable. I think it's such a bad norm that we've, encouraged our young people to go into. It's so normalized that you can, we're gonna just be like tens of thousands in debt, and that's just okay. I don't think that we were taught adequately about the significance of taking on so much debt. That's a financial mistake. But then on the flip side, doing my degree has opened up so many doors for me. It's allowed me to work in different countries. It's really helped me actually in my career, but I'm frugal, so I don't like spending money, and in hindsight, maybe I would have figured out another way to get into the industry that I'm currently in. During my time at university, I was also privileged enough to get offered internships at some very large design and fashion brands abroad. And I would say this one I feel ambivalent about. I feel mixed feelings about actually doing internships abroad for free. So when I went to university, I interned at Oscar de la Renta, which is a very big luxury heritage fashion brand in Manhattan. And it was such an amazing opportunity for personal growth, for learning how to work with different people in other countries. But I would say that working for free in a city as expensive as Manhattan or New York is maybe a financial mistake. I think at the time I wasn't familiar or maybe even confident enough to negotiate a salary of some sort. Maybe it's more common in that country to intern for free. In contrast to my fashion internship at Christian Dior in Paris, where it's very custom for university students especially to receive a base salary to cover their basic costs. If you intern in Europe or in France, you get covered by what is called Erasmus, which is a student funding program actually offered by the government, which is about 400 to 500 euros per month to at least ensure that you have like food in your stomach, or you can cover some really low overhead costs. But luckily I did have family in New York to stay with while I worked or interned for free. But I do think that, you know, that year I spent quite a lot of money, and I think that possibly could have been avoided, because it was almost like I took 6 months out of saving when I tried to save consistently throughout the year. So I do think that wasn't very sensible of me. I think that investing in internships is a really amazing way to build up your network as well. So I have long-term, you know, colleagues and friends that I built while I was in New York that I'm still friends with today. So I do think that that was worth it for me, and having that on my CV as well definitely allowed me to work for larger international Fortune 500 companies later on after I graduated. So if you can, definitely look into negotiating, learn how to negotiate higher salaries or a salary of some sort, or something at least that is equivalent in value. It's a really important skill to have even when you're just starting out in your careers. My next financial mistake is actually less obvious, but when I graduated, I obviously looked into moving out of home, and I remember my first apartment was it wasn't even that nice, to be fair, but it was a decent studio in Hampstead in London, and I remember being quite over the moon to find an affordable 1-bedroom studio all to myself in quite an expensive, quite nice part of London. It's good practice to look at the typical going rate for an apartment of the same size in the same area to give yourself a good idea of how much you should typically be spending for a property or an apartment of a similar size. I did notice that that studio flat was significantly cheaper than the typical going rate, but it was for a reason, guys. 10 days into moving, I swear to you, I got flooded out. I don't know why. My neighbour who lived above me loved to flood his bathroom. He loved to block the pipes with clothes, and he flooded it so severely that water was just pouring into my flat. I remember waking up at 1 a.m. with water pouring down onto me through the ceiling, through the light sockets. It was ridiculous, guys. But what I found out was actually that this happened every month, and it was quite normal for my neighbour to flood everyone beneath him, and they couldn't get rid of him. Maybe he was a squatter, who knows? But all I know is when I went for the viewing for this apartment, I remember they were actually renovating the flat. They were redoing the flooring. They were repainting everything. And I thought, oh my goodness, I'm going into like a freshly repainted, redone apartment. Little did I know that it was actually because they're always getting flooded. So I guess in hindsight, you know what, I should have just paid more money. I should have looked for an apartment that is slightly more expensive. You know, for a 1-bedroom studio apartment to yourself, you have to be willing to invest more money up front. It is what it is. London is a very expensive city to live in, and Sometimes it's worth not cutting corners when you're looking, just to ensure that you don't end up losing more money in the long term if you have to suddenly break your contract and get out of that flat as soon as possible. I lost so much money trying to get out of it. I had to really argue, threaten to take the landlord to court. It was a mess. It was just a hot mess, and it could have been avoided, but I ended up losing more money than if I had maybe just put more money up front in the first place. So don't do it, guys. Don't cut corners. The next one is probably a bit more controversial, but the thing is, I'm a very worldly person. I love to travel. I love talking to people from different countries, and I often found that during my time in college, I often actually dated people who were from outside of the UK or like international. You have to be quite careful with how much you invest financially into international or long distance relationships. I remember having an experience where I was dating someone from New York who was based here at the time, who decided he wanted to move back to New York, and would I be willing to like move with him or come later on, and offered for me to actually fly over to meet his family. And I do remember thinking, when you're in love, you're just like,
oh yeah, I'm gonna just spend like money to take a flight.
To be honest, there's nothing wrong with it, but you do have to be careful with how serious the person is about the relationship before you put up that investment. At the time, I remember actually spending about 500 to 600 pounds on a peak season flight to New York. It was around Christmas time. And the thing about Christmas time is that tends to be when flights are the most expensive they're going to be that year. And I remember, I did it, I went, I met the family, but then maybe a month or two later, it fell through and we weren't together anymore. It's a very tough lesson to learn, but you have to be careful about how much you put into a relationship before you know how serious the person is. If you're somebody who can't afford to spend money on going back and forth between countries, you have to be really careful that you've chosen the right person, but also, that you're not just burning money. But thankfully at the time I was still in my full-time career. I did have disposable income that I could put towards it. But imagine if, say, you weren't earning like a high salary and you had just blown, you might as well say, for some people it could even be like a quarter of their salary depending on your job, on a flight. So you have to be just very careful about falling in love and being naive. You have to be careful about how much money financially you put into a relationship. So there you have it. Those are some of my biggest financial mistakes. A lot of them tie into not investing early enough in my early 20s or late teens, because I was just spending all my disposable income on nonsense really. But at the same time, you don't also want to make a mistake where you're missing out on different life experiences which are going to grow you as a character, as a person, build up your confidence by trying out different things. But you do have to find a balance with how much you're spending on building cool memories with your friends versus setting yourself up to be stable in the long term. I hope this helps you to avoid some of the mistakes as well that I made if you're just starting out. And if you want to learn more about how to become more financially literate as a creative entrepreneur, definitely subscribe. Make sure you slap that like button. These are topics that I will be talking about more as time goes on in the coming year. Stay bougie, stay ambitious. Bye!